thought you were going to tell me about there was too much
But
alcohol.
anyway, well,
The story goes on.
Grant was an old reactionary from way back, like I think his father was too, in some ways. But anyway, Grant was a wheel in the military order of the
Loyal Legion.
Loyal Legion, I think it was, and in one of the papers that they published while he was president or something, they had some things to say about the Prodigals of Zion, this anti-Semitic.
I see.
So he was an old bastard. Anyway, I wasn't invited. I was working at the Circuit Court time. I wasn't invited to the meeting that they had here in Washington, but I went anyway, and I got up and said something about it'd be a good project for them if they'd correct some of these brass plates around town. And I cited that one on the Winder Building particularly. What I didn't realize was that the Columbia Historic, which is now the Historical Society of Washington, D.C., whatever, they renamed it recently. It was the old Columbia Historical Society. The principal of the local historical society in the district. The U.S. Grant had been the president of when those plaques were all put around.
I see.
Well, I got shut up pretty fast.
Who is this man anyhow?
But that's the War Department. That's the old War Department building.
And where?
And the tower that you're talking about is.
It's since, of course, gone.
Yeah, but it was on top of the Winder Building, which goes back to 1848.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what's in there now. Passport office used to be for some time. May I see that this book?
Yes.
I said something about those flying telegraph trains. I think in this. I say something about that. This was 1861. Meanwhile, the first telegraph train, which had been authorized in a qualified way, I guess it was been authorized in '61. This was built by Henry J. Rogers, telegraph engineer, with Meyer supervising. Principal transmitting and receiving equipment was a letter indicating well, that's it. That used the Beardsley, and I guess in some cases they maybe did run those cables over.
Well, you got to remember that whenever they had horses and heavy wagons and such, if they had the cable laid on the ground, that it would cut it. I've even had people build campfires over our telegraph wires. They come in the middle of the night and not even know it's there.
What?
They actually build a campfire right over top of our telegraph line. But by morning, we know it. If the telegrapher's been asleep all night, we'll know it because the line's dead.
And after Rogers, I've been away from some of this stuff, so
oh, sure.
I've forgotten.
Well, it's just, like I said, the more I read it, the more I realize that I missed or I've
Rogers
forgotten.
was working on that train, Rogers discovered the Beardsley. At this point, he found that the magnetic electric generator invented by George W. Beardsley could be employed in place of the cumbersome batteries. The result was the Beardsley magnetic electric telegraph machine.
I think Meyer also had read about Beardsley in a New York newspaper, or perhaps a scientific journal.
Could be. It was the Rogers train, the only one in being. And in late April 1862, Meyer ordered made ready for the field. Beardsley's son became a Signal Corps officer. So.
And Henry Rogers, I think, was from
Baltimore.
Baltimore.
Look in there. I should tell you that when they reprinted that brown book for purposes of economy and so on, they left out the index and also the roster. The original copy, which you've perhaps seen, has the roster of all Signal Corpsmen in the Civil War, and also a pretty good index. And I didn't know until after the book was printed that they'd left that out. I wish they'd asked me about it. I sure would have argued for its inclusion because, by the way, I had two copies of the original. I gave one to Becky, one that I practically wrecked it when I was writing my dissertation. She had it rebound. I haven't seen it since it rebound, but I have one copy now, which I paid $37.50 for from a secondhand bookstore. A lot of that's old Tommy.
Honey, I'll pet you.
He's not as skittish like the other. I had my library appraised some 2 years ago, and I was trying to help the appraiser, and I called a couple of Civil War book dealers in the area, and discovered that depending upon its condition, that brown book, the original copy, is now worth $400 or $450. This was 2 or 3 years ago, maybe even worth more now.
Well, if you buy it in Washington, D.C., it is.
But I don't know. There are probably still some copies floating around. I'd be interested.
Oh, there are. There are.
Have you seen it listed? I
Yes.
haven't seen it listed for ages.
Yes, yes. Dave Gaddy picked up a copy.
What did he pay for it, you know?
He said, Walt, way too much.
He didn't tell you how much?
No, he wouldn't tell me how much. He wouldn't tell me. But there are people, and you can pick them up, and sometimes you can get them for nearly a song. It just depends. It's like anything else, being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, well, as you may know, in the as late probably as the 1950s, before the Civil War centennial, which caused a big renewal of interest in the Civil War and so on. People would have sets of, in their attics or someplace, sets of these records of the Union Confederate Armies, you know.
The ORs?
The ORs. And they'd give them to you just to haul them away.
Mm-hmm. 128 volumes. Hi.
So that's the way those things go. The collectors are the ones that drive up the prices of these books, and they're the bane of the historians. However, when you come to sell your library or something, you sort of tend to get over on the other side of it.
And thank them.
Think in different terms.
We have, let's see, a few more items. One, which you probably may or may not be interested in. This is Wood's Plan of Telegraphic Instruction. That's a copy of an original. By the way, the original came to me through the Intra-Library Loan. It's an 1864 book. And Wood worked with Morris's school. They had a number of different locations for the school, as well as you mentioned Henry Rogers, Henry J. Rogers. Henry worked, yes, he was, and also with nautical signals and things like that. There are a few books.
Yeah, I think he was.
That he has on life-saving things. Most of his printing was out of Baltimore as well.
Well, I don't remember seeing that. I've never done really much work on the history of the telegraph, except for the Civil War period, the military telegraph. And I had to learn something about the military telegraph in order to write about the Sail Corps, because the two were so involved. And there's some things that I don't know about that period. When I was reminded of today, I was looking at some things before you came. When Meyer was canned as Chief Signal Officer in 1863, he blamed it on the American Telegraph Company or the corporations, and I don't know exactly what he meant, except that Steger himself, who was the head of Colonel Steger was the head of the military telegraph, was a Western Union official. In fact, he later, I think, became president of Western Union after the Civil War. but the American Telegraph Company was one of the biggest of the companies at the time, and whether Meyer had something specific in mind with respect to the American Telegraph Company, or was just sort of mad at the telegraph companies because they were so much involved with the military telegraph, all the people having come from the commercial lines, and also the government had commandeered the telegraph lines. Lincoln was one of Lincoln's first orders, I think. But it'd be interesting to know if he, you know, if there was more to his remark than just a general antipathy and suspicion of the. I never found anything that spelled any of this out in his papers.
Well, we do know that that Edwin Stanton's associations with Stager preceded the war. Stanton, born in Steubenville, Ohio, grew up, was involved with the railroads out there. Was also involved with, he had telegraphic connections as well.
As an attorney.
Yes, yes. And so it was a natural, he needed someone in 1861. The Signal Corps was a few detailed men in Meyer, and that was it. So he needed something, he needed it right away. Of course, you may remember reading in John Emmett O'Brien's Telegraphing in Battle, printed in Scranton in 1910, that the call went out, and some of the first folks to go was O'Brien, and also Carnegie and a few other folks. O'Brien's brother first went.
Well, they all came from the commercial lines.
Yes, and
the railroads were involved. I think it was Scott at Pennsylvania Railroad who was Assistant Secretary of War, I think, had responsibility for.
Railroad man as well, I believe, wasn't he?
He may have been. I've kind of forgotten.
But the existing lines, of course, were along the railroad tracks as well.
Yeah, I think Eckert was with Western Union.
I see. Okay.
I'm not sure. That's in my mind now. That he was. Yeah. Well, there was much involvement with it.
Speaking
with
of
corporations.
Speaking of railroads, I just wanted to let you know that some of the things that we do with signals and such wind up along with the railroads. Now, the first picture you're looking at there is a gun crew. That was done last Memorial Day in 1993.
Well, it's one of your reenactments.
It's a reenactment. This is, and I want you to take a look at the quality. As a matter of fact, if you wanted to use the detail in some of these, you can read the signs. You can read the signs on the painted boards, and when you get to the railroad pictures, which you will, you'll be able to read plates.
These pictures are almost as good as Brady's.
They are as good as Brady's. They are, because a photographer was taking those photographs with the exact same machines that Brady would be using from that particular period. Not the exact machines, but the same types of machines.
Is that you with the lady in this picture?
It might be, but I don't think so. I was off doing other things. I was pretty busy during that event. That locomotive was built in 1856. It's the